Please help me welcome our guests for today's panel. Chris Burke is the Program Director of the Web Design and Development degree. Ken Hamner is an attorney at law. Ken, give him your full bio and tell him what you do.
Oh, well, I'm not sure we have enough time for the full bio. I'm the managing member for the Entrepreneur Law Center. I mostly do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but I work with a lot of startups. And so, people wonder, well, why is an attorney here? The value of the services that I provide often transcend, strictly drafting agreements or negotiating contracts or lawsuits and so forth. And I'm there from soup to nuts with clients. And there's a big parallel between web developers and attorneys in that our clients really have no idea what we do or why we cost so much, but they can't do without us. So with that, I'll turn it over to the question and answer period.
Thank you, Ken. So when we were coming up in the industry, you basically learned business secondhand. You had some tech skills, and then you made enough mistakes with clients, right? What can the students learn while they're in school specifically about business that'll help them right from the beginning and so they can avoid some of the mistakes we made? One of you? Anyone? Anyone?
Sure, I'll kind of jump on that now that I know that my mic works, right? Hello, good morning. I've done freelance for God knows how many years, right? And like Joe's mentioning, along the way, you make mistakes. In terms of CTA, everyone knows what this means? Anyone? CYA?
It's a different CTA, but that is the right answer.
Anyone know CYA? What is it?
Cover your...
That's right, derriere. And someone like Ken helps us to do that, right? He looks at both sides of the fence, so to speak, whether it be for representing clients that are needing products, whether they be web or mobile products, cloud products, whatever they might be, digital services. But he can also represent and aid in folks like myself doing freelance to make sure that my own intellectual property at times is covered. Ken talks a lot on those aspects as well. What do you have to?
Well, I think just from a big picture standpoint, you should always evaluate your customer needs first. And when you're looking at what does your customer want from you, and I deal with that myself as well. They don't always understand fully what their needs are. They want to market their product. I can take my law firm, for instance. I've got clients globally, and the only way that they would ever be able to find me is through the web. And so people are finding their clients that way, and that's what they want, is that type of global reach. But when when they're in the process, they don't really know how to do that, and that's what they need you for. You should always look at things from your client's perspective, and that's the way I look at it myself as well. So you should, if anytime you depart from thinking about what your customer wants from you, and focusing on the technical aspect of how you deliver that to them, second, you're going to go right. Okay. Anytime you start putting the technical stuff first, and then trying to push it down to the customer, that's when you're going to start running into problems.
So a lot of these students will be probably looking at the startup world, either starting their own businesses or joining startups. Are there any particular legal issues that would help them in that pursuit versus things they'll need to know if they're just going to be a freelancer?
Well, I'd like to think that in today's world, everyone is somewhat of a freelancer, whether they're part of a startup or not, okay? And you should always, evaluate structuring your relationships with one another or with the companies that you're with in such a way that your relationships are clear, both by contract and according to law, obviously. I think that most startups struggle with that, and they kind of gloss over those issues in the beginning, and that creates problems later. I've got some cases now that are in litigation where, you have people that invented a product. They're very happy with this product working. The market accepts it, but they have infighting amongst themselves because they didn't take the time to define their relationships with one another from the beginning. and then they believe that one person put more into the product than another, or more into the actual startup itself. So,
Let me interrupt you there. I'm sure what they're hearing though is, I can't afford a lawyer right now. I have tuition to pay. So, so how would they define that relationship? I invent something with one of the students, right? How would I define that relationship so that we don't run into things without spending a bunch of money up front?
well, you don't have to spend a bunch of money up front to define your relationships, but you should commit them to writing. And there's a lot of resources online to look at partnership agreements and, you know, setting up LLCs and so forth, that as long as you can put things into writing and then have attorneys review this type of thing, it's not a lot of money then, okay? But it's when you absolutely discard defining your relationships with one another, that's when it becomes expensive later.
How relevant or important is it to set up an LLC or an S Corp right away?
Very, very, because if you start doing things, the minute you go get a customer, who does that customer belong to? You know, if you find out that your partner is actually doing more work or getting paid independently from you, and it was something that was a platform that you both pushed or you both pitched to the customer, then, you know, it's going to create distrust, and ultimately it's success that is going to be the problem. It's not failure. If you become successful and the customer becomes very profitable for one or both of you, that's what people fight over.
Right. Yeah. Is it expensive to set up LLC, S Corp, or anything?
No.
Or is it a couple bucks?
Yeah, it's a few $100s to get everything set up, and then, you know, you might spend a couple of $100s on somebody to actually, because in the beginning it's very easy because you have a vision of what you want to do together. Okay, you can always amend those relationships later as time moves on, but it's much more difficult and expensive to argue about what something was later.
Mm-hmm. Is it better to set up a partnership or an LLC?
Well, I think LLCs have an advantage over partnerships in that, you know, you have some tax advantages. You have limited liability. Partnerships in general, I mean, I don't want to sort of degrade this conversation into a big, long lecture about business entities, but in general, LLCs are preferable to partnerships because it limits your liability.
Right.
Have you had to solve some of these disputes between younger developers or student developers that no one can agree on how their contribution is valued for a business? I mean, how can they walk through that when, you know, everybody feels their contribution? You know, we just had some students that writing in the early classes made a game. So you had music students that made the music, you had DAD students that made the graphics, one of our mobile students wrote the game. And it's not for profit, they all just agreed they'd put it out for free, but if that was a profitable venture, everybody's going to see their time as valuable. How do you help someone through that process of valuing their contribution?
Well, I think in the beginning of a relationship, everybody sees, they're a little bit more amenable to recognizing each other's value because they know that they can't be successful without one another. If they believe early on that one person is disposable or less valuable than the other, then it's easier to flesh that out now, and you don't have as many free rider problems. You know, with somebody that's just sort of showing up and being part of the group and then saying, well, I want my piece. Far more expensive to deal with that problem later on. But in the beginning, it's really not that complex because they all realize they need each other in order to commercialize the product. Now, you know, you mentioned doing something for free. I mean, that's a hobby. That's not really starting a business. So for hobbies, people don't really fight over their percentages of hobbies. So
unless someone offers money for the hobby.
Then it's no longer a hobby.
Right.
That's right. And so you shouldn't go into a business venture with the idea that we're doing this for fun, but hopefully we make money. I mean, you're in every venture in essence to commercialize the product and make money.
Chris, we get this question a lot with people calling us saying, hey, can you have any students that'll build X for free? And there's a lot of students here that are going to need the services of web and mobile students, and vice versa. What can someone with a good idea do to prepare before they try to use the services of our students to build their actual web thing? How can they get from idea to something that a student will actually pick up on and work on as a project?
Web, mobile, anything, right? I'd hate to go to the bottom of the rabbit hole first, but let's do it. He's seen this happen to me before too. I have a phrase that I came up with. Everybody wants a rainbow for a nickel, right? They want their dog to have subliminal messages and tell people things through their website and their mobile app and buy this, enjoy it now. And everyone's really gung-ho about pushing everybody to a conversion, right? Getting them to convert from just, hey, I now recognize that you have a website, or I'm looking at this on a mobile device, and where do I sign up? Where do I pay? That's not always the best approach, right? And you're going to find when you do have folks, clients, that want you to build something for them, that's usually their MO, right? Is how am I going to monetize my business in an online environment? And again, it's not always necessarily the best way. So as a rule of thumb, one way to kind of cut through the BS and help your clients understand what it is that they really need is ask them a couple quick questions. The first and foremost I like to always address is, what's the intent, right? What is this thing designed to do for you or for your customers? And it's not always to monetize. You know, the customers might not even be aware of who you are or what you offer, whether it be a product or service. You first want to educate them on these things, right? So does it become more of a brochure-style site? Does it become something other? Again, steering clear of just the idea of buy now. So once you help the client recognize what the actual intent of this solution is, then you could start drilling down into more of the details, including what are some of the paths that we want our users to take in order to fully recognize what the product or service is, and then steer them to a conversion point. Does that make sense for everybody? Don't be so gung-ho to jump into something thinking, I'm going to build a service or product for this client that's going to allow this client to sit back and this thing's going to just generate, you know, residual income for them. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think for the mobile side, we have a lot of people that will say, I have an idea for an app, and they haven't taken the first step that you don't need any programming for, which is sketch it on a piece of paper and walk around campus and say, if I build this, would you use it?
Right.
And then would you pay for it? And if the answer is, you know, well, I'm going to give it away for free, well, fine. Test your model for how it's going to actually make money. If you think, you know, you're going to do something to find local record stores, and then local record stores are going to pay you to be in the app, well, how many local record stores have you talked to that said, I will pay if you get to this point with it? That's all just paper and hustle and spreadsheets. It has nothing to do with development. If you come to a developer with that proven model, like, hey, look, I have 10 local record stores that'll give me $1,000 a month to be on this if we build it, then you're in a different conversation than most of the conversations we get, which are, I have this idea that's totally going to crush Instagram.
Exchange-a-gram.
Right. And it's like, no, you probably don't. I mean, we run out of ways to say that, but it's like, that's probably a poor business model. Maybe you're right, but that's a different conversation. If you just have a pie-in-the-sky idea of, I'm going to reinvent the social world, there's a million things out there for what you're specifically interested in that you can find a niche and develop something small that then works, and then scale it to, you know, something else. I mean, Airbnb was designed because those guys couldn't find a couch to crash on. Like, they literally were trying to solve their own problem of, why isn't there like a listing service for like, I'll rent my couch off you? Mm-hmm. And they're worth, I think, $11 billion now. Right. So but there again, they had something that they could go to 5 people and say, hey, would you rent an extra room if I built this service? Figure out all the math, and then talk to developers and say, how can we build version 1? So.
An underpinning of this is,
go ahead.
Putting your idea in front of your intended audience, your intended users, and then iterating, right? Or are we all familiar with the term iteration, right? You start with initial idea, you put it in front of your users, your intended audience, and then you realize very quickly that they either don't know how to use it, they don't know how to navigate to certain feature sets, or they're just not interested at all. So then what we end up doing in startup world is what's known as pivots. You pivot off of the original idea based on what your end users actually know, understand, and want. Needs, wants, tolerance, and expectations is one of the things that I've been talking about for years. These are things you want to be concerned with and recognize in your intended audience. What do they need? What do they want, which is usually vastly different? What's their tolerance level? How long will they hold this thing, interact with this thing before they finally give up if it's too difficult to learn and use? And then what are their expectations? Again, if you're making, I don't know off the top of my head, a grocery app or something, what's the expectation of this app? What is it going to do for me? Is it going to organize all of the products that I want to go pick up at the store alphabetically? Is that the expectation? If it is, then maybe that needs to happen. That maybe needs to be a feature set. Is it going to organize all of the products that I want by the aisles in this particular store? If so, maybe that's another feature set you have to incorporate. I mean, you really need to focus on these 4 things, again, with your intended user. The only way to do that, like Joe's mentioning, is to put this thing in front of your audience as soon as possible. Prototyping, whether it be on paper, whether it be in some sort of a prototyping software, or if you're a firm or a group of guys, girls that are savvy enough, you might be able to move to some sort of a more interactive prototype right out of the gate that gets you closer to the end product. But again, keep in mind, you're always going to end up pivoting either away from or closer to a better idea.
Yeah, I think you said something very important there about when you're talking about managing expectations. There's something you need to understand with your customers is that they don't quite know what's capable, that they don't know what you're really capable of doing. And so the most important thing you can do in the beginning is to listen to what their business is and then understand what their expectations are for what you can do for them. And more often than not, there's an opportunity there for you to communicate a value proposition to them that kind of exceeds what they had expected from you. Because most people, they just want to have a brochure site or they just want to have some sort of an e-commerce site where they can reach customers, but they don't want to be commoditized. They want to have something that makes them differentiate themselves from their competition while still reaching new customers. And so if you can understand from them what their business model is, you're going to have ideas that they probably haven't thought of in terms of how to build that type of a business to a scale that they hadn't really foreseen. I think that one of the most, speaking from the standpoint of a customer, and I hear this from my clients when they're speaking about web developers, and I've felt the same way with web developers myself, is that when they are telling me, yeah, I got it, so you're a law firm, okay, so send me your write-up or your bios or whatever, and then they'll shoot something back to me and say, okay, that's there's your website, what do you think? And it doesn't meet your expectations. Immediately you think that you've been commoditized, okay? As a customer, you think immediately, I don't see a lot of value here. All they did was punch some code in and put some pictures on a piece of paper or, so that it's on the web, and I'm not blown away. I don't really feel like I got a good value here. That guy doesn't understand my business. And so the listening and the understanding of how to help them develop a business model that they didn't necessarily foresee from the beginning is how you're going to differentiate yourself in terms of price and value.
At this point, I think we're ready to take questions. We have other questions we can go back and forth for 3 hours on, but we'd like to hear from you all and
yeah, what do you want
who has the microphones and such. There we go.
I can't even see.
Yeah, I can't really see either, but Anyone have a question for any of us or for each other?
Hi, I am monitoring the feed on YouTube. So this question is from Pitch Entertainment LLC. He is a campus student that has already established an LLC. They are in the EB department, and they're looking for an app web developer. However, they can't offer much now in terms of payment or to the developer. Do you guys have any suggestions as to how to go about getting that developer?
I do. I think that, you know, whenever you're talking about price and how to negotiate value and contribution, it's best to sit down with an open mind with each other, both the customer and the web developer, because your web developer relationship, and you shouldn't be pitching a web developer relationship that's going to be viewed as a one-time event. You're going to want to have a relationship with a web developer that's going to be an ongoing relationship. So as that business becomes successful and grows, then you have the ability to make money as well. So whether that's an equity position in the company or whether that's some sort of billing based on the growth and success of the company, I would encourage everybody to think outside the box in terms of how to develop relationships with their customers in that way, because that's a way that someone can commit to doing with you, and commit to legally, I mean, but they can commit to that up front because they know they need you to be successful. But whenever you have a pricing problem of, well, I need to get $10,000 to do this, or I need $15,000 to do this, and they just flat out don't have the money, but they've got a business idea where they could generate that kind of money or more going forward. If what you do is successful, you should explore those types of opportunities and to have an ongoing relationship.
We get a good percentage of requests from entertainment business. What I would just say is send Chris and I a brief of what you're looking for. We circulate a bunch of those. We don't have a specific service for it, but our students are always looking for projects. So if there's any budget at all, if there's not, if there's equity, if there's whatever the situation is, if you send us just an email, we usually forward that to the relevant courses to say, circulate this. Mm-hmm. And with rare exception, those are declined, but you usually have at least a few students that are willing to have a conversation and say, well, let me at least call this person, because they're also looking for someone worth working with. So we've had a couple even that have pitched our final project courses. So our final projects, both of us have students that have a couple of months that they need to build something as a substantial product. We've had a couple that have been picked up and turned into final projects. So there is that opportunity. In the outside world, I would say that get absolutely hooked on meetup groups. I think I'm in 17 of them, except I don't attend each one every month. But every single technology has an Orlando meetup group, whether it's Ruby, iOS, Android. The Orlando Tech meetup is just kind of a hodgepodge of business and development people and lawyers and fans of startups and all sorts of things. That's a great way to circulate your idea and find either co-founders or developers. I think developers generally gravitate towards people that will just talk to them as people, and because they hate being sold on. Most people do the same thing at the meetups. They will walk up to, oh, you're a developer? Well, let me tell you about my idea. And take no time to understand specifically what technology you need, if you even need a technology yet, or whether really there's something out there that already does what you're trying to do. So it's a process. You can't really shortcut it, but certainly the local networking is a big part of it. And if that's an online student, the same would apply in almost any major city.
Yeah, let me throw something in there. I've probably talked with most of you more recently. Everyone went through one of those initial courses, Overview of Design and Technology, right, perhaps? And if you remember me saying, to kind of tangential to what these guys are talking about, soft skills, right? This school is fantastic at developing hard skills, right? Helping you to realize the tools of the trades, become professionals. Soft skills are equally as important as hard skills. We all know what these are? Soft skills, your ability to communicate with other folks, right? In a great way. Have a smile. With the increase in the tech communities here in Orlando, as well as being able to interface more with your customers, clients, as Ken was mentioning, it goes beyond your hard skills. You're going to forge a relationship with your customers and clients that is ongoing. And guess what? Those folks are going to be more inclined to choose you as their developer, web, mobile, cloud, whatever it might be, if you are someone that they get along with well, loosely speaking, right? Someone that they feel, hey, this guy relates with me. Hey, this girl identifies with my needs, what I'm trying to accomplish, as opposed to, I'm just going to sit in the closet and code for you. That doesn't work. Maybe you can outsource to that person, right? The person that doesn't have the charm, doesn't have the personality. You're going to be that face, right? These folks want to see in you that you can identify with them, that you have what it takes to interface with them. So soft skills are extremely important. And again, as we have an increase in our tech communities here in Orlando, the same thing holds true, right? Whether it's you're interfacing with them as customers, or you're interfacing with them as potential team members. Because let's not kid ourselves. The days of being a one-man shop are, for the most part, off to the side. You're going to have other folks that are helping you accomplish the goals of your customers and clients, right? So you might be a web developer who needs a mobile developer. There's your buddy. You might spin it around the other direction. You might be a mobile developer who needs a graphics person to build assets for your apps. Hey, you want to know that person. Computer automation people might need somebody who understands web in order to put up their offerings online so that their customers can recognize that they exist and reach out to them. So being able to network, developing your soft skills is a huge thing.
And I would also say, for any of you with ideas for businesses and all, don't discount the subject matter of the business. I think a lot of people get stuck on, I need a Ruby developer or whatever. Most good developers can change tools or know people that are other specialists if they're really into the topic. And I was talking to one of our advisory committee members last night actually about this, because he's an Apple Design Award winner. He develops well-known apps for a major company. And yet he's built a bunch of things that relate to the weather because he just thinks weather data is fun to work with. So he sends me like links to, hey, check this thing out. And it's like a full app for no one. He just thought it was an interesting challenge. And so if you're talking to him at the airport and you bring up iOS development, he's going to be like, you don't know what you're talking about, and I don't really want to talk about this. I'm sitting at the airport. But if you bring up, I hope this isn't delayed, there's a front coming, he'll talk your ear off about weather, and you'd end up with someone who could build pretty much anything in the world for you. So it's just, you have to somehow mesh interests and realize that, development is just a skill like anything else. I mean, it's, those people might have skills, but the interest in the business still has to exist because it's a problem they want to solve. And I think too often when you see people pitching developers, they're kind of forgetting that. They kind of encapsulate, this person knows Android development, and forget that they might also, be pissed off at their kid's school system and have day-to-day issues that other people have, And I think just having a rapport with people on what the topic of your business is, and then finding, networking with developers that way is often more beneficial. And you end up with longer-term partners also because the technologies change. I mean, none of the code in Facebook is anything that was written in '97, we hope. So, all of that stuff, it's all replaced, it's all changed. I mean, any of the work for that matter, I mean, my company existed from '01 to 11. None of it existed. I mean, it's all gone. iOS is updated twice. The stuff's gone. It disappears. So you'd have to find you have to just find a way to stay with the people that have the skills versus just latching onto the skills that happen to have people attached. Other questions? Anyone? That was a really long answer to one question.
Yeah. Tough questions.
Oh, there we go. I was curious about two of the things you touched on earlier, LLCs and costs when it comes to dealing with a lawyer. I know sometimes it's cheaper to use a lawyer than do things yourself. So how does the comparison for setup of an LLC on time and money look, the do-it-yourself way versus working with a lawyer to get that done?
Can I wait a minute? Because I just did this on LegalZoom, so I'll give you one to. No offense, but here's your standard.
None taken.
$350 is what I paid for my LLC.
Web developers in India for real cheap. I get it.
It's fine, and so we agree. But I paid $350 for a Florida LLC a month ago. So,
well, I think that the advantage clearly, LegalZoom is just a form company. Okay, you're not talking with them about who your partners are, what your anticipated salary versus equity position are, what your contributions are. I would always recommend you go to talk with an attorney, because it's actually not the forms that even though it's the forms that are important that you sign, it's what goes into the forms. And so, just in terms of cost, I typically charge for all the initial consultations, and I usually don't count too much for meeting multiple times, because I just charge a fixed upfront fee of $1,000 plus, and then that includes your filing fee, which is like $160 or something. But I would caution you against just trying to find that one-size-fits-all approach, because it doesn't really work. I mean, there are very few relationships where it's going to be 50-50 into the future. And what do you do if one of you decides to go off and work somewhere else and the other one's working full-time in the business? All those types of things need to be fleshed out and detailed in your relationship. So it's not a really high upfront cost. And attorneys will work with you as well. I mean, I've worked with businesses before where I saw an ongoing relationship, and I did pricing very similar to what I was advising you to seek out. Is I've had equity in clients before. I've had ongoing relationships where they were, I'll grow with their business. But when you're evaluating doing an LLC operating agreement, an operating agreement is synonymous with bylaws for a corporation. You should speak with an attorney, because you need to understand specifically what type of relationship you're contemplating with your other partners.
I think even though Ken jokingly said, "and I can outsource to India," in response to me using LegalZoom, I think it is very much the same thing. I mean, that's the code that lawyers write, and so I could probably send something to, if not an outsourcer, someone I don't really have a close relationship as a developer, because I know exactly what I need. I know all the backstory, how things connect, all of it. I need a specific unit of work delivered. So I don't really need all the rest of it. Therefore, I can pay less to a developer. Similarly, I've had three businesses. Yeah, this is my third business. I'm a single person LLC. In this situation, I didn't need legal advice. I needed the forms filed with the state. So if I took on a partner, if it was the same business and it was me and Chris, we're going to talk to a lawyer, because there is all that messy stuff of dealing with someone else, dealing with, I had a top startup that is gone because of problems with investors. Mm-hmm. So that's stuff that you need lawyers for. Mm-hmm. If you're just starting out and you just say, all right, I need an LLC, so that because the person next to me just said, I'll give you $500 for a website, well, then that's probably something you could file on your own and then take it to a lawyer as you grow up, as far as the business grows up. You know what I mean? So I think it's very much the same thing. I could also take, he could get some code done and just approve a business model, but when he brings it to a top agency that does code, they're going to say, yeah, we would have totally done this differently from the beginning. We're probably going to throw this out.
Well, the costs also, I mean, you have to look at the long-term costs. You're investing in your success, right? So you're not going to build a house on a foundation of total sand, where it's going to erode. And I've got a client right now where they did not formalize their relationship on an operating agreement with one another. They have a very successful patented piece of technology that they're commercializing, and they've spent over $250,000 between the two of them on just fighting over who owned what in terms of the LLC. And it's ongoing. They're not even halfway there. So should they have spent a few $1,000s up front to formalize something early on, rather than now it's a value steal strategy from one side versus the other? I think they both look back and say, I wish I had done something differently.
Does that answer your question? Fantastic. What other tough questions do we have? We have one over here, right? Or we have one in the back.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Carlos Mendez from the web department, and I got a question, a little bit of advice from any of you gentlemen on the panel. It's a little bit of a lower level question, since most of us are going to be beginners in the industry. How do you guys recommend we go about managing the gap between clients' perception of value of what a website should cost and what we, as entry-level professionals moving into a market with our expectations up really high, we value our skill set a lot higher than most of our clientele are going to. How do you guys recommend we manage that difference?
Well, let me take the first stab at that. I mean, because I'm a customer first, and I represent customers for web developers. And this is something where the parallel between communicating your value proposition to your customers is a challenge. Same thing is true with selling legal services, and I just illustrated that from the standpoint of legal services. Explain to them, you want them to understand why they need you to succeed, and then have them define for you what success is. Then nobody's going to come to you because they think their business is going to be just enough to pay their bills. And so if they need you to be successful and they think that what you do is important, then you should be able to differentiate yourself from a commoditized in the box product to show them that your relationship with them will help you achieve that level of success. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, why don't they just go to Foursquare or something like that and do their own thing? Because all they're doing then is just basically printing out brochures, right? I mean, what you're doing is supposed to be something different than that. Mm-hmm. And so you need to be able to communicate to them, understand what their business goals are, and then help augment those business goals by saying, this is what's possible if I help you. Instead of just saying, well, I need to make $10,000 or I need to make whatever because I spent all this money on my education and I'm really technically competent. They expect you to be technically competent. They don't want to hear from me that I've got 3 master's degrees and can practice in 8 courts and all this other stuff. They expect me to be competent on what I do. And they expect you to be competent on what you do. You just have to do a better job of communicating to them how that can make them successful.
So let me jump on that. Communicating, right? Soft skills. We're back to that. You said you were in web, correct?
Yes.
So you're going to find as you go along that your vocabulary, your language, becomes that of which that they don't understand. And I say this all the time to students, regardless of which degree or which industry you're pursuing. Like Ken's saying, they're expecting you to be, competent, savvy, and expert in your field. And as a result, like I said, your vocabulary, your language is going to be up here. And you're going to start talking about stuff, PHP, SQL, Angular, front-end frameworks, full stack engineering. They're just like, they have no idea what you're talking about. And guess what happens, right? All of a sudden you're talking with the guy who's using all this fancy lingo, and the same thing holds true with people using computers for the first time. Our grandparents, first thing that happens is they inside their head go, I'm stupid. You just made them feel stupid. So guess what happens to the relationship? They go, yeah, he seems like a really good guy, smart as hell, blah, 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 but I just don't understand him. So I'm going to go with this guy over here that I understand what he's telling me, because I sat down once with a client. Kid you not, this guy looked like, what's his name, Charles Branson, the guy who owns Virgin? Is that his name? Richard Branson, sorry. And the guy looks at me, I guess, the whole time I'm talking with him. And he's just looking at me like, I'm going to catch you. I'm going to figure out how you're trying to rip me off. Because I'm using this type of language with them, the stuff that I know, right? Tech, web stuff. And just looking at me like this the whole time. Like, where are you trying to trip me up? And then I saw that and I realized, because I've seen it before, I realized, okay, I need to start dumbing down my language, right? So that he can identify with me. And as soon as I did that, the guy's posture changed. He stopped doing this. He stopped scowling. And he started asking questions, meaningful questions, alluding to, hey, how can you help me? And then I start talking to him in that angle, and it works out. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things, you'll be willing to go to a doctor and have him treat you like crap beside the bed as long as he can cure cancer. But you're not going to go to a web developer or an attorney or even an accountant or any other level of professional services and have them talk to you in a way that you don't understand what they're talking about and you don't understand what they can do for you. And so to the extent that they don't understand what kind of value you can bring to them, that's your mistake for not communicating that to them. And you should do it in a way that they can understand. They don't want to hear all the technical jargon. Right. As, that doesn't help you at all. It doesn't hold you up on a pedestal where they say, wow, I don't understand what he talked about, but I guess I'm going to write him a big check.
Right.
I think the two things you need to do when you're starting out is, but at least what always helped me for years working with clients, is work backwards from a budget. If you can, a lot of times when you're starting out, you'll end up with these laundry lists of this is what I want built, and then you end up calculating it all, and then you give it back to the client, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to spend 15 grand. I wanted to spend 2,500 bucks. So you start with the budget and work backwards from here's what I can do for you for what you would like to spend. And that generally is very helpful. And then the second thing is you always have to find a way to communicate to a client, I can work faster than you can. So how much time do I need to talk to you is really the question. Yes, I can do this amount of work for 500 bucks, but only if you never call me and we never talk about it and you just let me work. A lot of the hours built into a project are always, let me stop and get approval. Let me wait for some kind of piece of copy from you. Let me wait till your photographer's done. Let me wait till this video's done being shot. All of these pieces that are really nothing you can help, that then stretches out your $500 project to $5,000 because you had 55 phone calls and 30 emails a day to try to get your $500 worth of work done. So you need to find a way to say, what pace are we going? Where is this is all the things I need to be successful. Where are they going to be provided and when? And then you'll have an accurate budget, because then it may very well turn out that your $10,000 job is $2,500 if you can explain it in a way of, look, if you provide me these things at this date and then let me do my work, this is the price. But I'm charging $150 an hour if I'm interrupted. And that sort of thing can often end up with, I kind of had to learn that the hard way. When I started out, I bid high, and granted, I was a professor at the time when I was 26, so I kind of had that option that I already had a job, and so I could just say, well, here's a high price, and if you don't want it, that's fine too. But when I quit teaching and when I had to find some of these lower paying jobs to fill in the gaps is when I had to be a lot more creative with, all right, well, this person actually only has $2,000 bucks, but they're actually asking for enough work that I could probably finish in 10 hours. So that's not really a bad client. So you have to kind of find where that fits. And then also as you go, find what your specific thing is. You don't need to be, every project isn't for you. Every person's technology is not for you. You need to find what you're providing and then build your network of, well, I only do front-end web. Oh, well, you're asking for a complex server app? Let me introduce you to so-and-so, and kind of have that network of work that, because then work gets kind of fed around, and these, like, you'll always find these, like, groups of developers for that reason, is because, Ken calls and explains a project, and you're like, man, I really could use this gig, but it's not really what I do, and you have that temptation of, well, I could probably learn this. The rule I've always coached students on and always used myself was when you look for freelance work, you look for 80%, 80-20 work in terms of, and 80-20 is used a lot of different ways, but the way I always used it was, if you ask me for a project, I know how to do it cold 80%. So I already know how I'm going to do it, what tools, what language, all of it. I know 80% of it. 20% of it, I'm learning on this project, and that way, if it takes longer, it's only 20% of the job, but I actually was paid to learn something else and get that much better. Because then that 20% ends up in my 80% next job. And so you continuously grow by always stretching a little bit. When you get that, you try to look for that one requirement that's like, I'm not really sure how to do this. I've seen it done. I'm going to learn it on this job, and then you start to build from there.
I want to expand just on one more thing with regard to that. I totally agree with what he said about communicating an expectation of value with regard to budgets. Okay. However, I also would encourage you to walk them through that as the first stage and say, first of all, what is your budget for this type of project? Secondly, why is that your budget? What is it you want to achieve? Because sometimes you can be part of that budgeting process where they actually are willing to pay a lot more money than they ever even contemplated at the inception of this conversation, because they see that there's a lot more value to be had. Okay? Because if they see that their real goal here in developing this web, app or whatever is to get a larger customer reach than what they have now, then if they have an ongoing relationship with you that's based on trust and the ability to communicate and grow, then you have the capability of expanding that budget exponentially.
Did we have some online folks asking questions again?
Yes, this is from Connie. This is for Joe or Chris. Basically, what do you feel is the most common direction or focus for new graduates? She's mobile development. Do most focus on independent contractors or work for a specific company? Basically wanting to know the likelihood of demand for each direction and what they feel, or what you guys feel is best for new students.
Yeah, I don't understand.
I think coming out of our degrees is a little bit different in terms of the job market, but not entirely. For mobile, generally, we're still seeing a lot of full-time hires. We're not seeing a lot of freelancing or people that are graduating and just freelancing. But it's going to become a broader range because the number of companies that need in-house mobile, and for that matter, in-house web, but that they've needed that for a while, but now need dedicated people in mobile in large companies is expanding. We have large companies coming on campus all the time asking us about our mobile graduates now because you just end up with, for a lot of us in this room, mobile's kind of old already because, I owned an iPhone 1 and it's, now been a while. But for major companies, they look at it completely different. They look at it as, all right, now there's 500 million devices that we can address with this product, whatever it is. Now it's serious. So we need people to worry about it. So it expands the number of jobs in traditional employers because if you were at a major bank or an oil company or something like that 3 years ago, mobile was on their board of things to look about, things to think about, but it wasn't really an immediate need. And now it is. So, and then on the other side of it, you have a lot of opportunity for smaller companies, being a freelancer, just, doing that sort of thing, because the rates are high enough. It does support being a mobile developer on your own or with a small group of friends that also want to do it. So you have this huge range when you get out of options, and a lot of that comes down to who you are and what you're looking for as far as, stability versus entrepreneurial side. You want to look at, am I okay with making $25,000 a year with the chance of making $250, or do I just want to make 80 and go home at the end of the day and raise kids or have a hobby or go surf or whatever you're into?
Let me throw something on that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I believe the original question again was, do I become a freelancer? Do I go work for a company, right?
What do our grads do?
What do our grads do?
Yeah, what do our grads do?
Again, I've told this to roomfuls of folks over the years. It's advantageous for you as a graduate. This is just one perspective, right? It's advantageous for you to go work for a firm right out of school. Why? If you're really interested in doing your own gig, being a freelancer, starting up your own shop, your own business, you stand to learn a lot from the firm that you go work at, right? Not only how they organize their teams, but how those teams handle the various aspects of the business. Everything from client relationships to billing to how we manage our overhead, how we segment our departments, right? And ask questions about those things to your employer, to the folks that are running this firm. Does that make sense? So you can get a broad stroke of how these other companies, or at least this one that you go to work at, how it manages all of these things. So you have a much better understanding when you decide, hey, I'm going to strike out and do this on my own. I mean, something as trivial as billing, I've had to learn over the years what's appropriate, what's not acceptable, what do they prefer. Again, you might find a client prefers that they want hard copies of everything. You find other clients that everything digitized is much better. How many of us have used or purchased something through a vendor who uses Square, and you end up getting a receipt to your inbox, and it has that cute little thing that says, "Hey, here's your receipt. Was it a good experience?" And there's a frowny face or a happy face, and now you're able to rate, that vendor on their experience, because again, it comes back to that relationship and how comfortable did they make you feel, right? In terms of that exchange, that transaction, that conversion. So that's starting to go a little off topic from the question, but I've found that works well. You work for a firm, you get familiar with how they handle all their internals, and now you have a much better idea on how you might do it if you strike out on your own, or even if you want to strike out on your own. There's a lot to it. And we touched on some different aspects in terms of, is it feasible to be a one-man shop? Or do we really need to network and bring in some folks, either 1099'd or bring them in as a team member, and now we can get a lot more done. You mentioned this a few minutes back. You can get a lot more done if you have 10 people working on a product or a project than if you're trying to do every aspect of it on your own, including billing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the things you said are right. If you're going to if you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to start your own company, or you want to be a freelancer, either on a large scale or a small scale. It's not an either or decision. In the beginning, you're going to go into working for a company and you're going to get a lot of free experience and a lot of free training on how not to make the same mistakes they make or how not to make mistakes that they're going to help you avoid. So there's a lot to be gained from going and working in a company in the beginning with the idea that you're keeping in mind all the things you're learning as you go.
Yeah. What other tough questions do we have? I know you guys have lots of questions. That's why you're sitting here, right? You got a mic behind you.
Oh, I'm sorry. As a freelancer, is it a good idea to draw up contracts between clients? And if so, like, what's a good idea to include?
Well, you should always have contracts with your customers, and you should also, when you're talking about collaborating, you should also define your relationships between the people you're collaborating with, right? If you're handling the billing, what you're responsible for. If you're upcharging services, to the client, and you're handling the client relationship, and you're having somebody else do some function, in addition, you should always memorialize those things in writing so that there's no misunderstandings later. And what you'll find as a freelancer is that, because I do this myself with my law firm, there are things that I refer out to other attorneys. I don't handle divorces. I don't handle things, criminal defense or whatever. And there are attorneys that I work with specifically on certain types of litigation that it's very similar to the relationship you'll have with other freelancers that you need to partner with. And so all those relationships are memorialized in writing so that you don't have a problem later with, well, I thought I was going to get more money, or they're billing you more than you can actually bill the customer.
I think, and I'm not a lawyer, I've just worked with many of them. But I think the thing you need to keep in mind is that law ultimately needs to be in English. And you can get a lot out of lawyers if you've already written in normal English what you would like to have in an agreement. I mean, there's a bunch of online templates for services agreements anyway, but basically, you just have to think through, what am I actually trying to say legally? I'm trying to say who the parties are, what's being delivered, when, for how much, what I'm not responsible for, do not sue me because can't get blood out of a turnip. For some way to say that. I had like a whole page on that, and that's really what the gist is, right? You just have to think through like if I was just going to tell this person, here's what we're agreeing. Okay, I agree that you're hiring me. I agree what that date is. I agree whether you're paying me hourly or for a specific project. We agree what counts as something that you're paying for, what doesn't. We agree who owns it. We agree when you should have X product. And we agree what happens if something goes wrong. And then, then you either find a template that has a services agreement that says those things in legal terms, or you call someone like Ken, because if you send someone like Ken, and most lawyers will tell you this, especially when you're starting out, like eventually you'll be too busy and you'll pay Ken more because you'll be like, you'll literally call and say, the client's paying me $10,000, it's due Thursday, can you get me an agreement? I need it today. And then you're paying Ken a lot of money for really something that a lot of it you could have written out and made it easier for him, but that's fine. That's part of being, that's part of services. Whereas if you send him, here's what we're doing, I just need a contract that says this, then his time is less, and therefore you can save some money while you're getting started.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as an attorney, it's not that difficult to draft contracts. It's difficult sometimes to understand what the parties envision in their relationships that need to be defined in that contract. But the worst thing that I see as an attorney is coming back later, and this is what we did agree to, and they don't think that's what we got, or they don't think that's what we agreed to, and now you've got to try to put the genie back in the bottle. secondly, go into a legal Zoom or doing your own drafting of a contract and then bringing it to an attorney and saying, just review my work. That'd be like me trying to write my own code and then saying, I just need you to, same thing with your work, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is, but it's the same thing of the human element is the expensive part. If someone, again, works on paper to define a web project, and they say, we have this grand vision, and we've already shown it to clients, and they will pay, and I just need you to turn it into what's real, that's basically what you're doing with an attorney. You're saying, I already have done the difficult part of determining the parties involved, who gets what, when they get it, how much they get it for, all of that. I need you to turn it into a real thing. So, yeah, you don't want to start, like, I'm sure what annoys attorneys is it's the same idea as don't try to write a full contract and then send it to an attorney and say, can you make this into a real thing? Because they're going to have to rewrite it. But if you at least have all the bullet points, that will turn into a contract very easily. Very similar, if you have a wireframe that you've already shown a client and they say that's what the website's going to look like, you at least have something to start with, and they've shaved the amount of time that you don't start with a blank piece of paper. Mm-hmm. But you always have to remember with legal that it's always starts with what is our relationship, like what's going on here, and then from there you can have a much better conversation with an attorney, because you'll basically learn it from talking with lawyers that the questions they're going to ask. So then you can start to call and already have some answers, and that therefore saves the amount of time you're spending on legal. Other questions?
Yeah, an online person? I see a hand back
From
there.
the interwebs.
Yep, it's another online question. The benefit of LLC versus S Corp.
Okay, so those are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have an S Corp, you can have an LLC that files for S Corp status. S Corp status is an IRS way to be taxed as a partnership rather than a corporation. Okay. In short, the real advantage to having an S Corp is that you can pay yourself a salary that's a reasonable salary for the value of the services, and the dividends that come out of that are not subject to self-employment tax. LLCs, you don't have that capability unless they choose S Corp status. I know I'm really getting into the stuff that you guys are probably sitting there going, okay, whatever.
Like cutting onions.
If you did not understand that, do a lot more reading or talk to Ken, because I can tell you it is a very expensive tax bill if you get that wrong.
Honestly, though, I've known Ken for years, and over those years, I've found that he is really good at plain English, like making it so that this difficult legal jargon is understandable by you and I.
Let me explain one real key thing. Everybody thinks, well, why would you choose an LLC rather than an S Corp? Okay, S Corps are limited to, I believe it's 100 investors, and they all have to be individuals that are residents of the United States or U.S. citizens. Okay, so I'm dealing with a company right now they were acquired by a British company. I'm representing the buyer, and turns out that the company that they're buying is an S Corp, and they have a license for the type of business they're in. Well, this British company can't be a shareholder. They can't buy the stock of the company. So we have to do a somewhat more complex acquisition. So if you're going to start a company that needs to have outside investors, understand that if you're going to have an S Corp, you're going to be limiting the type of investors that are going to invest in you. And so you don't want to do that from the beginning. It just makes things more complex later.
Yeah. It's 12.
Is it 12? Are we done? Okay, well, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
All right.
right, guys, we have another session that we need to prepare for, so please move to the exits on the side of the room to your left. Please do not leave anything behind. Take your bags, cell phone, purses, and anything you may have brought in. And please throw away the trash on their way out if you have any. Thanks, guys.